Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Braitch, and this is the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I am an emotional health and leadership coach and co-founder of the not-for-profit Seen and Heard, which supports those seeking healing, connection, and systemic change. My vision is to move myself and the world around me towards connection and compassion. And each week, I will connect with amazing guests who are on their journey to bring about meaningful change in their own lives and the world around them. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. Before we start this week's episode, I want to offer a gentle warning. This episode contains detailed accounts of child abuse and other traumatic experiences. Please listen with care and honour your boundaries. Thanks very much. Welcome everybody to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I'm delighted today to be joined by Jon Wedger. Jon Wedger is a former Scotland Yard detective turned whistleblower and campaigner, known for exposing institutional failures in the handling of child abuse and exploitation cases. During his decades of service in the Metropolitan Police, Jon witnessed firsthand how systemic corruption and silence could obstruct justice for vulnerable children. Speaking out came at great personal cost, but it also marked the beginning of his life's mission to give a voice to the voiceless and to stand up for truth and accountability within powerful institutions. Today, Jon is a public speaker, podcaster and advocate for survivors of abuse, sharing both his professional insights and his personal journey of faith, resilience and healing. Through his work, he continues to raise awareness of the need for compassion, integrity and courage in protecting the most vulnerable in society. Welcome, Jon.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Chris. Cheers.
No, brilliant. You know, when we contacted you only recently by Andrew, one of our other directors, and you said you'd come on, really excited because you've been very inspirational to people within the world of supporting abuse survivors. Your courage at standing up and calling things out for years, has been really powerful. And just wanted to thank you for the work that you've done.
No, it's my pleasure. And the reason I got a coat on is because I've just come back from a thing I called pants swimming against depression, and I swim all year round, and I video it. And I've just been swimming in a freezing cold lake, and I've done a 40-minute swim, and then I do a podcast whilst in the water, just to show the benefits of cold water therapy and everything else. And I aim it really at survivors of abuse because it's free, it's healthy. And it's just that little kick of endorphin that might stop someone from going over the edge. So as much as I can, I'll always try on whatever level to do my bit to either expose the malevolence or help those that have been through it.
Beautiful. Well, amazing work, Jon. I really look forward to talking about that today. The cold water therapy one, I can resonate. I had a few hours surfing this morning. I surf all year in the water, and the cold water therapy is fantastic. If you haven't done that already and you're listening, get out there and give it a go. But let's begin at the beginning, as I always do on these podcasts, and just love to hear a little bit about how life was for you in your early years, so that we can understand how things worked before you came out into your work. So, what was it like growing up?
Yeah, I had a great childhood. Brilliant, a good family. Although I had an absent father. My father was never divorced. Back then, they're Catholics, my parents, and my father come from a sort of Anglo-Sicilian family, and Catholicism was really dictated every sort of avenue of what they did back then, and society was different as well. I grew up in the 70s, initially from central London. My dad was a black cab driver. My mum, she sort of I think she worked in accounts or something like that, but she just worked hard. She was a stay-at-home mum most of the time. But then when my father started not bothering to come home, she sort of took over and brought us up really on her own. And then my father died when we was quite young. But it was just great. I mean, I lived in a good area. I lived on an estate, but I was surrounded by mates. Schooling, I loved schooling. I just enjoyed everything I did, really. But I got sort of disillusioned in my mid-teens, lost my way a little bit, didn't really know what I wanted. I suppose it was the effect of not having a father there. you don't realise it at the time. It's only as you get older you think, yeah, all the other kids sort of had guidance, and I lacked the guidance really. And I sort of become self-reliant, and I didn't know what I wanted, and I drifted, and I went from one job to the other. But something sort of inside me burnt away that I just wanted to do something with my life. I just wanted, I don't know, to have something, a legacy to look back on. I went away with a friend of mine on a selection thing for the British Army, and I got through it. It was only a weekend thing, but I hated it, and I thought there was no way I can join the military. It was just, I found it weird, and it was too constrictive, because I'm a free person, I'm free thinking, and it was like, the nearest thing, I'd never been in prison, but I thought this must be like being in prison, being dictated to by everything you do. The physical side of it was quite all right, and a few of the things that they did, but just being told what to do constantly, I thought, no, there's no way I'll get through the training. It's not going to happen. It just wouldn't resonate with me. So I sort of shelved out. I got an apprenticeship with British Telecom, but I had a passion for swimming. I just love swimming. It was like, even today, I've been swimming today. I will try and swim every single day. Back then, my life was really governed around swimming, so I wanted to do something where I could go swimming. So I thought I'd join the fire brigade, because they sort of, in my opinion, didn't really do a lot. And then they had 4 days off where I think I could go swimming 4 days a week. So that's how sort of base level it was. But my sister had got herself a job as a fingerprint expert with the police, and the Metropolitan Police had a diving unit. And she said, why don't you do your swimming and your diving, so taking up diving, scuba diving, and the police will pay for it. And I thought, well, that sort of sounds like a good idea. So I applied for the police as well as the fire brigade, and I got accepted by both. But I put in for redundancy with my job with British Telecom, and the only one that could sort of accommodate me was the police, because the redundancy came out sort of after, when the fire service wanted me to start my training. And I thought, if I don't take the redundancy money and I don't pass the training, then I'm sort of stuck. So I went with the police. I sort of let God guide me, really. The police was a second choice. So I went away, joined the Metropolitan Police, and the training was like the army. It was basically run along the same lines. A lot of the instructors were ex-military. They did marching. And I thought, oh no, I shouldn't be here. This isn't for me. And I didn't like it. And I didn't actually like the police. I didn't like the attitudes. It was weird. And it was like there was an underlying bullying culture in it. And it just wasn't for me. So I sort of did my best to try and get kicked out of it. So I used to disengage, and I used to do stupid things. I started deliberately drink driving, and so I'd get stopped by the police. And on one occasion, I actually had a motorbike, and I drove for a red light in front of a police car whilst drunk. And I was in my training at the time, my basic training, and I thought, well, I'm going to get stopped and I'll get sacked, because I don't know, it was like destiny. I thought it'll be their choice to get rid of me, not mine. And that's how I sort of went along the line of thinking. And the police stopped me, and they went to breath test me because I was clearly over the limit. But the guy who was in the car, he knew me from the diving. I'd actually taught him to dive, and he just let me go. So I couldn't even get kicked out. It was odd. So I sort of succumbed to it, and I got through the training. That sort of came and went. And then I went on the street, and the street policing was totally different to the training environment. Those who seemed to do well in the training environment, I don't know, they were just sort of like two-dimensional people, very bland, would obey orders. There was a very judgmental attitude. But when you got on the street, it was being a good person that got you through it. And if you was a decent individual, you did really well. And I did really well. But it was very tough as well. And there was a lot of violence. But I sort of didn't mind it. I didn't mind that sort of side of it. It was just crazy and frenetic. And I just blossomed. And it just sort of took off. And I thought, I can actually see myself staying in this job. I really want to be in this job. But then I got caught up with a local girl, who was no good, really. And she already had a couple of kids, and then I got her pregnant. And that was my life with her. It was short-lived. I ended up going on to have 2 kids with her, but she was suffering all sorts of issues with... she'd come from a bad background, an sexually abusive father and dysfunctional mother, and she herself had addictions, which I didn't know about. And it was 2 cultures. I'd come from a nice background and she hadn't. She'd come from an inner city rubbish background, really. And but I'd experienced parenting and I loved it. And I must say, to this day, I've loved every minute being a parent. It's just brilliant, you know. And when people sort of doubt their position as a parent and see it as a plateau that goes on and on and on, just stick with it, because the kids will soon grow up and they're the best investment you can ever give to life, to yourself and to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
yeah, so I was happy when she left me, right, because it was abusive. So I lived in a domestically abusive relationship. So I got an experience of that. Not one I would ever want to repeat. It was horrible. And it was the first time I really sort of understood anger and hatred. And she was full of anger and I hated her. I generally had hatred. And I could understand, and I'm not agreeing with it or endorsing it, but I understand when people lose it with their partners and either hurt them or kill them. Because I was in a situation where I had actually had thoughts of I could strangle her, I could do this. It's wrong to say it, but that's the level that my mindset and my mental welfare had got me to, from being entrenched in just horrific domestic violence and abuse, you know. And she was very abusive towards the children. So when she left, and it was like a relief, but I was then stuck with children of my own, and then 2 other children. The social services intervened and they went to put the other 2 children into care because I had no parental responsibility. So I fought through the family courts and I was awarded the parental responsibility in the residence order for the other 2 kids, but I didn't qualify for adoption or fostering because I was a single man. And back then you couldn't qualify for it. You had to be married, you had to have this stability, which I never had. But they gave me a thing called a kinship, which said, you know, in the absence of anyone coming forward for these 2 boys, we will offer it to you. And I got something like £20 a week. It was ridiculous. Whereas now, probably get £1,000 a week or something, but back then. So I lived in poverty for a long time, and I was working in a job which was demanding at the best of times, but then my home life was equally as demanding. And it was hard. And then I got the chance to apply for a really, really good specialist post, and that was with the River Police. That come up, and I put in for it, and it was the percentage of me getting it. It was something like 1 in 2,000 applicants are successful, because it would only come out every now and then with a few positions, and thousands of people would apply for it because it was such a good job, the River Police. And I got it. I don't know how, but I got it. I got this job. And I went to work on the River Police, and it was brilliant because they worked the same system as the fire service. So I ended up working that 4 days on, 4 days off, which gave me good time at home with my kids. I had a mortgage by this time, and just life went on, you know. And then one day, one of the sergeants, the intelligence officers that were based at Wapping Police Station, where the River Police are, said, you know, look, you're a really hard-working lad, and you seem a bit different from the other lads. He said, I've got a job here, and I really need someone to do this job. And I didn't realise that this guy was connected to other units, as it were. You know, he was a man who knew wheels within wheels, and in the police and a lot of these government agencies, you get these people. Now, whether that's classed as Freemasonry, I don't know, or whether it's classed as just the guy is incredibly well connected. But this guy was very well connected, and he'd been handpicked by someone very sort of senior in the police to look at a growing problem. And that problem was sex offenders that had left the prison system and everything else and gone to reside on canal boats, within London. And they had information that there was one or two of these people, and I was told, look, it's come from the National Crime Agency. There's two that reside in London. If you can find another two, that'll be your job from now on. Just get on with that. He said, we'll be happy. Well, within the allotted time of a month, I hadn't found two. I'd found 90. And it then took it to another level. The government then realised this is a huge problem. So I was appointed full time to just keep finding them, basically paedophile hunting. And it was something I've become very accomplished at, very successful at. But then I realised that society is in stratas, and the people I was dealing with tended to be the low and the working class element. And all of a sudden, information was coming in, because I become what they call a single point of contact, a SPOC, for sort of transient paedophiles. So it wasn't just those on boats. It was anything that gone missing. Because of my success, people were getting in touch with me. And it was going outside of London. It was going into the overseas territories of Britain, but it was also going into all sorts of foreign countries. And I was getting information about sex offenders that had absconded on boats and gone out to Gibraltar, to Jersey. These islands had a terrible, terrible problem. It's really weird when they sell themselves as these idyllic little bolt holes to retire to. And there is some extreme malevolence on these places. And once you're there, you're stuck. You ain't going anywhere. And very nepotistic. The Ascension Islands was a very tricky one. These British territories in the centre of the South Atlantic. And they had a historic problem where they were trading their young girls for sexual services to the sailors that were coming in from the American Navy, and they were swapping them for fresh fruit. I mean, it's something that had been going on since Napoleonic times, because Napoleon was imprisoned in St Helena and on the Ascensions, and these things have been going on and were still going on. And when the police actually looked into it, they found out that the Attorney General of the islands, he had a connection to child pornography and everything. So it was just really, really strange what was going on. But we got information came in, so I'm just going to plug in my power pack. We got information that come in about a boat that had been moored on the real upper reaches of the Thames towards Hampton and that way, and this boat was holding parties, right, in which young boys have been taken from care homes and were sort of used as sexual toys in this on this boat, and the guy that owned the boat vessel was someone involved with the British government, and it was to do with writing the doctrine for children looked after in the care system. He was also a master at a very sort of high fee-paying private school, public school as we call them in this country. The rest of the world calls them private, but we call them public. And he was involved with politicians, and they were having these sex parties on these boats with young boys. So this sort of took the information that I was receiving now into these sort of upper and ruling classes. And I got warned by an officer from the Central Paedophile Unit at Scotland Yard. Look, be careful. The government doesn't like it when this sort of information comes out. Be very, very mindful, because you start to make waves, especially in Scotland Yard now, with what you're doing. The interest in this is going a bit higher than you think. So I'm just putting a power pack down for my phone. Anyway, within a couple of days of that sort of words of advice, I was moved. They shut the unit down. I was taken off the operation, and after a little bit of protesting, because I was lied to, and I was told initially that it was due to like secondment, manpower, staffing levels. It wasn't. It come from very high up that we're not to look into this. So it was. Oops, sorry. This is just my power pack has just slipped. But it was my first sort of experience of, this cover up, this will within will, and the establishment and things like that.
Well, thank you,
how
John.
how how deep does this go? And then I was sort of debriefed by quite an experienced, was senior only in his service, not in his rank, but paedophile investigative detective, and he turned around to me and he said, "Look, it's really weird with policing. In any other sort of genre, if you do incredibly well, then your career is cemented for life. But here, you do well in investigating this crime, you get moved on." And then he started mentioning politicians, one of them being a Home Secretary that was involved, and it was shocking. And then I was told, because I used to go to intelligence meetings, I used to liaise with the intelligence services, I used to liaise with military intelligence, army intelligence, and all this thing that had a role in looking into paedophilia. And it was really weird. There's so many agencies that do monitor this. The Post Office monitor it, the NHS monitor it. So when they come out with this nonsense, they didn't know, it's a lie. It is a lie. I'm telling you now, it's a lie, because they do know. And I started hearing of people in sort of just like public life, television personalities that are classed as national treasures, and they're involved in just the most appalling crimes against children. And one of them, he was I'm not going to name him, but he's a well-known sort of rock star, as it were. I don't know, singer, rock star. I don't really care for these people, but he was caught up in a child pornography sort of racket, and he ran off to a country in Europe to reside. And this guy told me, he said, we were out to get him, and he was given the heads up, and he went and immigrated abroad, into Europe, because they knew you couldn't bring him back. And everyone thinks he's brilliant. So it just made me look at a society in a totally different way, and it made me look at criminality in a different way, that most of the criminals I've been chasing had done it for economic reasons. It was done for money, because they were skint. And it was usually people lower down in society's food chain that were doing it. The council estates. And then you've got the robbers there that go on to do the armed robberies and all that. And then you realise a lot of them were victims and survivors of abuse themselves. And it started sort of explaining itself. And then I realised that offending against children didn't know the barriers. This is where it started involving them above us, whereas before it was those below us.
Yeah,
And
thank you, John. What do you put that down to? The people above being so involved in these networks, given their backgrounds. It's something we touched on before we started recording.
we got to look at this on many levels, and we got to look at this like historically, holistically. It's not just one example, but it's a fascinating topic which I've spent a long time looking into and spoken to many, many people. One of the biggest influences I ever got was a profiler for the FBI who went on to do a lot of work with me. Fantastic woman. And she explains it this way, that a human being is made up of three parts in respect to the work she does. So you've got your intellectual self, your physical self, and your emotional self. Right? They all have to work together, but they will all work independent of each other. So he said, if you sexually abuse a child, depending on the age, will depend on the severity of the damage. But intellectually, a survivor of sexual abuse, childhood abuse, can go on to do quite well. And that's been proven with CEOs of companies where that they've gone on to achieve, if not overachieve, and you've got like a higher level of borderline psychopathy in these sort of managerial roles than you have anywhere else. That Gordon Gecko, the pain is weakness and all that sort of nonsense. Physically as well, people that have been abused can overachieve, can go on to do incredible things because the pain and the need to show the world who they are and what they are, and no one will ever hurt me like I've been hurt, is there. So you will get a greater percentage of people in elite military regiments that have come from childhood trauma. You'll get people that go into sort of world-class level competitive sports that have come from terrible, terrible childhood, because they know what pain is, and they know what it takes. And again, when you look at some of these bodybuilders, the fact is it's just a pretense. It's like a show to the world. I'm this big, aggressive pit bull of a man, but inside they're not. And that takes us to the inside, which is the emotional self. So whereas the other two, they can go on to really sort of mask the damage and I don't know, sort of whatever it is, heal it in some way by the achievement. But the emotional self, you can't do that. It don't work like that. It don't work like the other two. And that will be damaged greater the earlier the child is abused. So if you get someone terribly abused at the age of 5, for example, and no therapy is given, you will get the emotional self will stop at the age of 5. Now we need, as adults, we need to emotionally mature, and it's a thing called reasoning and rationale. So in order to be a functioning citizen on all levels, and a parent and a friend and everything else, we need to have good reasoning. But if that is broken, it's a bit like when the third world uses a child soldier. They're deadly because they have no rationale and reasoning, no consciousness. They will go out there and use that spite of a child, because children are naturally narcissistic. They have to survive. It's a bit like the bird coming back with the worm in its mouth. The one who chirps his mouth the loudest will get the worm, because that's narcissism. So children have to. They shouldn't be thinking about their siblings, because that's the parents' problem. Their reasoning is to be cute and to survive by all means. So children can be incredibly spiteful, but it's only as you go through life and you talk to share, you give them boundaries. So if you unboundary a child, you ruin it. So you can give a child no love or too much love. Either way, the outcome's the same. You will produce narcissism. It's going to happen. So that's why, as good parents and good citizens, we keep our children in check. And they say it takes a village to bring up a kid. And it used to be the case in this country where your neighbours would smack you around the head if you were mucking around, as well as your parents and all that sort of stuff. That don't happen anymore. And that's probably why we got a lot of stabbings and rubbish like that going on. But
John, just on that one, because it's a really important point, and thank you for making it that idea that when trauma happens in childhood, whether it's sexual abuse or anything else, there is that moment of like being frozen in time. We do a lot of emotional healing work with people. I'm an emotional health coach. I often have to take people back gently to that time when things happen and basically allow them to reparent themselves through the process to bring that
yeah,
part home. You have to sort of, free it. But you talked there about, needing a village to raise a child. And in your previous podcast I've watched, you talked very much that the, children from the social care background were being targeted by these paedophile rings because they were vulnerable, because there wasn't anyone looking out for them. And we had a conversation as well about the fact that the abuse rates in the boarding schools, these elite boarding schools, were extremely high as well, because again, someone else was in loco parentis. There was no one
yeah,
looking out for them. There was an institution looking out for them, and yet both ends of the sort of socio-demographic spectrum were alone and not looked after, and therefore people could infiltrate those schools or those care homes or those facilities and start to pick off vulnerable children. And as you say, that's created people who've come out, maybe from the social care side of things. They've gone on to do these great things, athletes or in business or from the boarding schools, the corridors of power, etc. Many didn't though. Many couldn't function. They couldn't function in adulthood and never held jobs and things like that. So could you speak to this idea of when children are growing up in institutional environments, whether it's in a posh school or it's in social care, what's not there for them?
Well, I mean, a kid should be brought up by both parents, mother and father. There has to have that balance, the patriarchy and the matriarchy. And what we're seeing with these emotionally broken people is the same no matter where they are in society. And it's the only where criminality where you will get a pauper meeting a king. You won't get there anywhere else. And it's the glue that holds them together. It's this brokenness. And then if you've got the sexual offending going on at the same time. So I was approached by a guy called Robert Montague, and his father was Lord Montague of Bewley. And he wrote a book, and he invited me to his book launch, and he read a few passages from it, and it's graphic. It's not for the faint-hearted, because he really goes in to the actual dynamics of sexual abuse. He doesn't hold back, which I think is very, very important, because I don't think it's healthy in anyone who wants to understand this, where we just say abuse. No. This is a grown man putting his penis into a young boy's anus, and that is going to come with it a whole plethora of damage, more so physical damage, and it will rupture the anus, because an anus is a sphincter muscle. It's not a vagina. No matter what the transgenderists want to tell us, it's not. The physiology is totally different. And once you breach a sphincter, which is a loop made up of chains, so it's little links in the chain that form a circle, and they rupture. They may look aesthetically that everything's in check, but it's not. It won't do its job, and it will leak. It will emanate, and whether that is a gaseal barrier, or a liquid barrier, or a solid barrier, it will not do its job, and therefore survivors of this sometimes they leak, and if they're working later life in a group environment, they're going to smell. So you tend to find survivors of this isolate themselves from society. So they isolate themselves physically and spiritually and emotionally as well, because there's a shame, there's an embarrassment that goes with it, and that can lead to suicide. And if you haven't come from that environment, or you're uneducated in that, it can be shocking. It can be upset. I can always remember a kid at school. He got a good walloping back then in the 70s. Teachers hit kids because he defecated his trousers, he pooed himself. But what the teachers had no understanding of was the fact that his stepfather was raping him, mainly raping him, and that's what was happening. And the teachers thought he was a defiant, rude little boy who couldn't behave himself, but he wasn't. He was a kid screaming out for help. So this is why when I talk about these things, I do it like I was taught. I want to put a story before a court, and someone said, if you want people to understand, don't gear your speech to the intellect of a judge. Gear it to a classroom of 10-year-old kids. If 10-year-old kids can understand what you're on about, you've done your job. That's why you got to bring it down, and that's why I'm very, very graphic. So there's a really good publication, which I think is restricted now. It's called The Poisoned Bowl. And it looks into 3 high fee-paying schools, one being Eton, Winchester, and the other one might be Radley, one of them very, very, elite boarding schools. And it looked at this system known as fagging, right? Fagging, for those uninitiated who are ignorant to this. The fagging system is when the school gives the governance of discipline. It deputises it away from the dons and the masters and the teachers, and gives it to the older boys to govern the comings and goings of the younger boys. But they're allowed, with permission of the masters, to mete out corporal punishment. Well, that gets abused. I mean, anyone who thinks that that system's not going to be abused is an absolute brain dead idiot, because that's what happens, and especially with younger people. There was a fantastic documentary about the Russian army, and they have exactly the same system in conscription. They allow the older recruits to deal with discipline for the younger recruits, and all it results in is this culture of the older recruits kicking the daylights out of the younger ones. But when the younger ones survive and get 2 months in, they're allowed to then kick the daylights out there. So you just get this gladiator school of young men kicking the crap out of each other. But what people need to understand with young men is a thing called testosterone, right? They sort of basically sort of blank it out of the psyche. Testosterone. Young men spend a lot of time masturbating. And when I give these talks, the women hate this, right? Because I've got a son and they don't want to hear it, but it needs to be said. It's the hormone of testosterone. It's what makes a man, and it gives a man his sex drive. So on top of the older boys disciplining young boys, which back then was caning, and you can imagine how overzealoted some of that would be, especially if you don't like the younger kid, you're a fag. There was also the sexual abuse that went on. The sexual abuse, and then if you're sexually abusing a younger boy, they're learning, and their first experience is going to be one of anal rape. It's not going to be one of love and of compassion and all that. It's going to be one of brutal anal rape on a backdrop of being thrashed and caned in the absence of your mother or your father and the loving environment. And the conclusion of this book, what it turns around and says, is that how these schools are run with the thrashings, the bare-bottom canings, and the buggery is nothing short of what the Greco-Roman gladiator schools were. That's what they were, and it was based on the same ideology. Mm-hmm. And Eton prides itself on the fact that it's produced 11 prime ministers. But at what cost? Mm-hmm. What have they produced? Yeah. How is that a leader of a man? It's borderline psychopathy is what they produced. So I remember approaching Boris Johnson, an old Etonian, and I said to him, Boris, this was when he was mayor, before he became PM, and I explained to him, look, this is what's going on, this is who I am, and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, it's got F all to do with me. He was totally void of any emotion, anything. I might as well have told an oak tree rather than have told him, and then at that point I realised when he became Prime Minister, he's going to do F all. Mm-hmm. And there was a politician approached me, a guy called Andrew Bridgen, a really, really lovely man. And he said, I know Boris, from the House. I'm going to take this to him. And I said, Andrew, it's a waste of time. He won't do anything. He went, no, I know him personally. And about a year later, he said to me, no, you're right. You don't care. I said, I know he don't care. Because they've come from this environment. And now Robert Montague.
So, just on that, John, just because it's a really important point, just want to just take a pause. We'll come to Robert Montague because that's the same background as well. But, there's a great writer called Nick Duffel who wrote a book, Wounded Leaders. And that book focuses in on the people who came through the elite boarding school system, who've then gone on to, mete out that kind of enough justice, that entitled dissociation really on the world, whether it's in politics, business or media or the judiciary, because we know that there are certain parts, media, judiciary, politics, etc., where people from private school backgrounds massively over-index. So the premise of it is that these wounded leaders are running the show, but they're running it from a very traumatized perspective.
Of course, yeah.
A film, Boarding on Insanity, has just been released to explore exactly that.
Well, their emotions, every decision they make that goes through the filter of their emotions is going to be influenced by this shocking damage. And they think it's going to be all right. If you ever look at any of the works of Richard Curtis, who does the Blackadder's and these middle-class rom-coms such as Four Weddings and a Funeral and all that, it is just full of references to childhood beatings and buggery all through it. And it might be putting a metaphor like taking a crumpet up the rear without blubbing, and there's all these stupid little adages he puts through it, but he's alluding to this childhood anal rape and a thrashing in the public school system all the way through it. I watched all of his work, and it's all the same, all the same. I can always remember when I was an officer on Vice, I ended up in the Scotland Yard's Police Vice unit, where this is where I saw the majority of these cover-ups. And we used to raid brothels, and they would be from brothels in crappy, horrible high streets, right up until these sort of plush Mayfair apartments. And we kicked the door in on one such venue, and it was in a Mayfair exclusive. It was South Alderley Street, right in the heart of. Oh, stop it, you two dogs fighting there. Right in the heart of the most affluent real estate in the world, really. And when we went in, there was this guy in a suit. His trousers were down, and he was being caned by some dominatrix. And when we went in, it all come to a halt, and he looked round and he said in the most plummiest of British accents, he said, "My God, officers, am I in trouble?" And to which my sergeant said, "Put your trousers on and F off," right? And his backside was just lacerated, and where this prostitute had been caning the daylights out of him is behest, really. And I took this scenario to my FBI friend, and I said, "What is it with this British upper classes and this need for corporal punishment, where it tends to be very much a British problem? You know, you get it elsewhere, but it seemed to be a very British thing, the spanking and the caning." And she said, because it was done to them, and it was so traumatic for them, and no one came and helped them. In order for them to function, they have to re-establish that trauma, but put in themselves now in governance, whereas the control is back with them and not with someone else. So it's all to do with control. They need to take the control back, and that's how they do it. They relive that trauma, but then put themselves in control. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that sort of makes a lot of sense. But the one thing which was brought to my attention with this, because at the same time we are having a lot of care home scandals coming out, such as the Beach Home Care Home, Beechcraft, Shirley Oaks. There was so many of them where kids were taken from dysfunctional families, or even put in for respite or spurious reasons, put into the care system and just raped and beaten and brutalised. It was horrific. And the survivors, those that did survive and did manage to sort of navigate their way through life without suicide and chronic addictions and everything else, got these working groups together to try and take class action against the government. Robert Montague turned around and said, the difference between them people that you help and people like me is that the police will listen to them. The police will never listen to us, the ruling classes, because they don't believe it goes on. And they're so influential, we get no justice. In fact, those from the lower and working classes get a lot more justice than us from the elite classes. But we don't get any sympathy either. And I felt sorry for him. And I thought, no, he's right. He is right. And then what happens? They leave these places. That first sex experience is through anal rape. Any complaint gets met with by a damn good thrashing. And Robert Montague, in his book, he goes on about complaining and making a protest outside Eton, saying that the fagging system is nothing more than a rent boy racket. He was then brought before the Don of Eton, the boss of Eton, however it's termed, who then decided to deal with the situation by thrashing him bare buttocks. And he said the guy actually took a run up, and he said the pain, the injuries he got were conducive to hot wire being lacerated across his back, Mm-hmm. So this is character building stuff, apparently. And he said that the guy took immense pride and tradecraft in doing this. That was his thing, you know, that he could slice open a young boy's bottom with a cane.
Yeah, thank you, John.
And then
It's-
he put him under the pupillage, the supervision of a Monsignor who had this religious, what they call it? There's a word for it, a pastoral role in Eton. Put Robert under him, and the guy decided to deal with Robert's attitude adjustment by raping him. You know,
yeah.
I just
Well, yeah, John. Thank you. Yeah, just pause for a second. I think there's people coming in. But,
someone rang, so I've just had to
yeah,
cut them off.
that's good. I just
But
want
then
to
you get
on
the
that one.
institution, then cover it up.
Yeah,
They cover it up.
I want to talk about that a little bit, if we can, John, just to make sure we have time for that, because everything you're saying to me, Seen and Heard was set up to support people who've been through the boarding and independent school system because of this shame, this sort of myth of privilege.
Yeah,
No one was listening to us, to this
yeah,
community. As you said, it wasn't happening. So, emotional support services and 35% of the people that come to Seen and Heard have experienced abuse at their schools. And we know from the independent inquiry into child sex abuse, only 1 in 9 people ever tell anyone about their abuse. So we're talking about the tip of the iceberg that's still coming out now. But as you've said, if in this sort of character building world, things have improved a bit in the system now, thankfully. But abusers were being moved from school to school with references, or they were being moved different countries, as you said, with the boats that you work with. It was happening in the care sector as well. People were being moved on to protect the institution. So can you speak a bit about, you work for one of the biggest institutions there is, the police service.
yeah.
But what's the
Well,
experience of it within institutional settings?
sorry. Yeah, so they've just had a case yesterday. It made the news of a corrective juvenile correction institution called Medhamsley, and it's Medhamsley is based in the northeast outside Consett in County Durham, and the guy that was really the main sort of antagonist in this school was one of the members of staff called Neville Husband, and they reckon he'd abused 3 to 4 boys every single day, different boys for 15 years. So, I mean, that's going to go into the thousands. But the thing is with Neville Husband was that the prior to his appointment there, he was working at another correctional institution, a Borstal, where he was caught with child pornography, which he made himself. The boys that were in there were recognised as the inmates at the Borstal, and the venue was recognised as the Borstal. So he was making his own child pornography in the Borstal. He was allowed then to move on to deal with other young boys. He was then caught smuggling pornography into prisons, and nothing was done about it. They raided his place of work and they found sex toys and more pornography. Again, nothing was done about it. He then went on to become a minister for the United Reformed Church. And when he was eventually picked up there, thousands and thousands of child porn images were found, on church premises on the church computer. So every point, it's not even a failing. It's a deliberate cover-up.
Mm.
It's not. This isn't just we missed that. No way. There is a course of conduct which we see typical all the way through this system, all the time. I see it absolutely everywhere. That one of the care homes was Shirley Oaks in South East London. At one time, they had 19 known and convicted paedophiles, male paedophiles, working there in the residential capacity. 19. And in Hull, there was 119 paedophiles that were identified as working there. Now, politically, you find that there is more abuse in left-wing constituency in care homes than there are right-wing, because that's down to equality laws. And that was cited in the government inquiry when they looked into it. Why? The question has to be asked why. And it was all to do with the fact that they didn't do vetting on homosexual applicants. Now, in no way am I saying that homosexuals are paedophiles. I'm not saying that. But if a homosexual paedophile gets in and his vetting isn't done, then there's every chance he will tell another homosexual paedophile. They will get a job there, and of course they are then. Do you know what I mean? They're the fat kid in a sweet shop, then, aren't they?
Mm.
And that's how it goes on. And the police, why are the police covering this up? Well, there's three strands to this. You've got incompetence, right? You've got a 2% success rate in historical abuse cases getting convicted at Crown Court, 2%. And that's really down to police officers, firstly, not doing their job properly enough. If you want gold, you've got to dig for it. Secondly, it's evidence to a provable standard beyond all reasonable doubt. It's difficult to find. The victims themselves can be discredited quite easy because a lot of them go on to have addiction issues, get convictions for shoplifting and things like that, which makes them legally dishonest people. And that can all be cited in this field of conflict, which is the Crown courtroom. And it's a war zone in there, and they will use anything and everything to go against you. 10% of those that have been abused go on to abuse. And the other damning thing here is, and this is a heartbreaking thing, is that these abusers, right, they get the other kids to abuse other kids. And then you have a thing called the conspiracy of silence. How can I report a rapist when I myself am a rapist? And I hear that all the time. And you have to say, well, you were made to do it. You was under duress, but they still said I had a choice, but they didn't have a choice. They were a kid and they were made to do it. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes people say that they enjoy doing it. You get all these things. It's so so we get the incompetence on the police level. Police officers not trained properly enough. They haven't got the tenacity. There's a laziness, a huge reluctance to do it. It's not a fashionable unit of policing to work in. Historically, child abuse, they just got women to work in there, and a lot of them women would then end up going on maternity leave, and the cases would be passed on and on and on. And in the end, the abuse gets, which is what happened in the Baby P case. Mm-hmm. It was pregnant officers passing it on, and then lactating officers coming back off maternity leave and not wanting to go and do home visits because they didn't want to take scabies and other, issues like that, medical issues like that, back to their little prince and princesses back home, because the lower classes have these disgusting antisocial conditions. And so we got that incompetence later. And then when all else fails, we have corruption, because this controls global politics. This has got the biggest blackmail value of any criminality. So years ago, you could blackmail a member of parliament for being a homosexual, right? You will do as you're told because we caught you in the toilets, and you're going to do as you're told, right? And especially if we've got this, like we're saying, they've come from these elite schools where they have gone through this system, and it has in some way altered their sexuality or whatever, right? They can be bribed, but God bless people like George Michael, who actually fought back and said, you know what, you ain't bribing me, because Sony tried to bribe him with his sexuality. We're going to out you, we're going to do this if you ever, and George Michael said, you know what, I don't care, I don't do it then, and so we've got to take our hat off to people like him who actually did say that maybe that cost him his life, we don't know.
Yeah. Jon, thank you. With the institutional side of things, something like the independent inquiry into child sex abuse 3 years ago, none of the 20 recommendations have come to fruition yet. Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, we work with a group called the Edinburgh Academy Survivors, people like Nicky Campbell, Alex Renton, Giles Moffat, they got together as people abused in the Scottish schools. They've just brought out reports saying, nothing's happening in these inquiries. Why is nothing happening?
Well, Chris, out of the 20 UK ones, 3 of them were from my recommendations. 3 of them regarding safeguarding, right? I gave the largest statement to the inquiry, the ICSA inquiry, right? None of my stuff ever made the press, none of it. So they're coming this rubbish. The Commissioner of Police, the Home Secretary, Theresa May told the Minister of Police, don't go near Jon Wedger at all when we brought this to their table. So they all know about it. Like Boris Johnson told me to wear FOB, so they all know. The Scottish one is interesting, right? Because it happened a bit later than all the others, right? Now, on the Scottish inquiry, there was a kids' home called Forneathi, which is in Perthshire, and it was a respite, and it was a what do they call a maladjusted home for girls, mainly from the west coast, the poverty-stricken Strathclyde area. They were putting these kids for spurious reasons into Forneathi, right? And the woman that was running it, headmistress, just got convicted about 2 weeks ago. She got convicted of these cruelty against the children. These young girls were beaten, they were drugged, and they were pimped out. And the girls that survived it turned around and said that they were taken at night. Two men would come to the school during the day, and they would go through the classes pointing out girls that they wanted. These girls would then be singled out, drugged, and taken to what they said was a very posh house. The men were all sort of white, very posh, and all smelt of tobacco, pipe smoke, and things like that. And out of 20 girls, 15 of them picked one man out as being their main rapist, abuser. And it was a man called Nicholas Fairbairn. And Nicholas Fairbairn was linked in with a guy called Bob Henderson, that you probably know from the Edinburgh side of it, Dirty Bob. Both of them were QCs. Nicholas Fairbairn became a Lord. He went on to become the Advocate Depute for Scotland, and he was in charge of the whole Scottish judiciary, the Procurator Fiscal. He was having a long-standing affair with Esther Ranson, right? Esther Ranson, he was having an affair with her. She set up the child line, right, which in my opinion is a nonsense, because over the years of child abuse, I only dealt with one referral from Childline, and I worked in the busiest London borough for child abuse. Got them from schools, got them from everywhere else, one from Childline. So I think it should be shut down. I think it's appalling. And Esther Ransom has got connections to one of the biggest paedophiles to come out of Scotland, who had total governance over the judiciary and all major sexual cases. He was linked to a guy called Bob Henderson, Dirty Bob Henderson, who used to also, again, preside over these child abuse cases. And Bob Henderson was involved in the abuse and also suspicion of murder of rent boys in Edinburgh. So this is why, when people sit there and think, how does this happen? Well, this is why. This is exactly why, because it's the only criminality that goes through all classes, like a hot knife through the butter of society. You don't get that with any other criminality. Mm. And if they want to put this right, anyone that is involved in these inquiries, they need to be vetted. CRB checks are a waste of time, these criminal record checks, because most paedophiles do not have previous convictions. If a paedophile is to have a previous conviction, it tends to be for an offence of deception or fraud. Very strange. They're very deceptive-minded people. But to have like this course of conduct like you do with dishonest criminals, where they'll start off as a shoplifter, then there'll be a thief, then a robber, then an armed robber. You'll see this escalation through their criminal career. You don't get that with paedophilia because it doesn't, on the whole, get detected. Right? They need to psychometrically test these people. We had allegations, many allegations, and I'd heard police officers from both the National Crime Agency and the paedophile unit warn me about Leon Britton, our former Home Secretary. And he died with them allegations hanging over him. How was he allowed to be a Home Secretary? Well, a rudimentary vetting and also a psychometric test would have outruled him straight away. He would not have been given that job to be in charge of our British justice system. Mm. So this is what they need to do. They need to be vetted and psychometrically tested to a real security level degree, every single member of every panel, because there's plenty of people out there that are in the legal system that are not paedophiles and don't want to be paedophiles, and they would be suited for these roles.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I hear you, and it's so sad to hear so many hundreds of millions wasted on on these child abuse inquiries. If the recommendations don't get done. So I want to ask what your view is on mandatory reporting, so effective mandatory reporting, because that thing of passing people on with a reference or relying on the DBS scheme to sort of
it has to be done. I mean, first thing what I've got to say is the clues in the word, right? Inquiry. It will inquire. We don't need inquiries. We need investigations where people will be nicked and they need to go back in time and they need to look at not just those who did these crimes, those in public office who committed the offence of malfeasance because they did nothing or they were complicit or they were active in covering it up. And they need to be brought to book. Chief constables, senior social workers, lower level officers, all of them, if they were involved in coming up, they need to be nicked, right? And mandatory reporting, of course, we need these, but it needs to be done balanced, right? Because there's when I went to work in child protection for the police, right, I had to be psychometrically tested, and one of the things that they were against were really survivors of abuse getting jobs as investigators because they call it the hero complex. You can sometimes get overzealous with things. You can see something nefarious where actually it's not. Do you know what I mean? So you need to have a balance with it, and there needs to be some sort of filter. So because otherwise you could end up having all sorts being said, and actually there is innocent explanation with some of it. So I think definitely mandatory reporting, but that needs to then be investigated properly and balanced. You know, and done the right way, and there should be total and utter fairness and total and utter transparency. They say it all the time: openness, honesty, and transparency. You hear the commissioner of police say, well, you big hypocrite. Well, why don't you do it then? Why don't you work under that? And the best one also is they must act without fear or without favour. And that's a clue there. Fear and favour. Do not be frightened. And too many whistleblowers are frightened. Frightened. And whistleblowers need to be protected. And anyone caught interfering with a whistleblower, you know, that should be a serious arrestable offence. You know, and that's it. So, yeah, I think there should be, but it needs to be done properly. It needs to be done. But, you know, you can't have people just making malicious rumours up about people because they don't like them. There's got to be substance behind it. But also, anyone working in these fields, they should be taught how to recognise abuse in children. You know, I'll give you an example. I was working with vulnerable kids, but more like the 17, 18-year-olds that were autistic, but they were non-verbal and violent. So I did that for a few years, and it was something that actually I didn't really want to do. It sort of frightened me, but after a couple of months of doing it, I actually loved it. I really did. I really felt I was doing good, and but it was tough. So anyone who does that full time, and I work with beautiful people, really honourable people that were on minimum wage as well, which is appalling. But there was one girl at this unit, and she was at home, but there was social services intervention and all that, and an absent father which would turn up and take her out, and I think he was a minicab driver, and the girl would go out sometimes for a drive with her dad and things like that, and she would only eat mashed up food. And they just thought, oh, that's just her autism. And she was non-verbal, and I went, no, you need to monitor this girl. And they went, why? I said, because I've seen this. The mashed up food means something solid has gone into her mouth that she don't want in her mouth. Right? And I'm telling you now, that's her way of dealing with something solid and alien going in her mouth. I said, she is being sexually abused. And it weren't their reality. It weren't their thinking. It weren't their cognitive process. So it got dismissed until a year later when it came out that she had been taken out. She was being sexually abused.
It's heartbreaking.
And they said, you was right. I'm not saying I want to be right, but things like that, from those in the know, they need to listen to us. And they also sometimes need to listen to the survivors as well. So who better than the survivors to come forward and say, look, this is what you should be looking at. So the survivors should be given the voice a lot more than they are.
Let's come on to that a little bit more with the time we've got left, John, because that's so important. Is, you know, you've worked with a lot of survivors. We do as well. You know, the voices aren't heard often enough, and there isn't the support in the third sector, in the charities. There isn't the money now to support, you know, victims coming forward. it's a real mess out there. And without any of these recommendations from ICSA or Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry really coming into fruition, it's not a better situation out there. All we're seeing is the politicization or the racialization of it with grooming, Asian grooming gangs, etc. Even though that the majority, 90% plus of the abuse that's happening out there is happening in homes or in schools or in social care, in scouts, churches, etc. It's not Asian grooming gangs. It's so what has to happen for abuse survivors, from a healing perspective, for being seen and heard, and that's why we're called Seen and Heard. And what do the institutions need to learn from them?
Well, healing is the key word, and healing comes about with another word: justice. Right? They need justice, and they need the people in there that will give justice, and that comes through the police. Right? They can take private prosecutions, but they're hugely expensive, and they're hit and miss. And the private investigator has no access to these intelligence indices, whereas the police have. So the police need to police this properly, and these cases need to be going before the court, and there needs to be a massive deterrent that if you are caught doing these things and you're in a position of trust and all that, you will be found out. And also keep the politics out of it. If a paedophile is working in a home and he's a homosexual, that they should not be relying on their sexual orientation and all that to get them out. If you're guilty, you're guilty, regardless of your sexual, which has happened in the past, and allegations like that have been made against the system, and they backed away because they don't want to look like they're being accused of racial bias or sexual bias and things like that. So I think the main thing, being an ex-copper, comes from the fact that there needs to be robust, reactive and massive proactive policing on this. The policing needs to be so proactive, and they need to be on these kids' homes. They need to start looking at these residential care homes that are supported living, which are not governed by Ofsted, and they're just a money-making machine. That needs to stop. The government needs to take control back. They need to be properly registered. The police need to have total access to go in these places whenever they can to follow up leads. Kids that are going missing all the time, they need to be properly debriefed, to find out exactly what's happening and who's happening, and any corruptible links. So if there is evidence that is being withheld, and cases distorted, and that has come from within the system, whether it's social services, the medical industry, or the police, if these malfeasance, corruptible links need to be outed, and it needs to be treated with utmost severity. The message needs to be put out there. You mess with kids, you are going to get hurt. One way or the other.
Thank you, John. This is very powerful to hear that. I mean, you made a point, and then something else I watched that you'd done a podcast on, where you said, this is almost the biggest societal change or improvement we can make is to support people who have been abused, and to reduce it, because people who are wounded in this way go on sometimes to propagate that. Not always, of course, that's very important to say, but it tears a hole in the fabric of society that then the criminality, the addiction, the broken families, all the sort of damage that goes down the line. There doesn't seem to be anything going back into prevention much.
And the suicide. Let's not forget the suicide. Look, I don't know the guy. I don't know what he went through, but I was saddened at the suicide of the boxer Ricky Hatton. And having seen Ricky Hatton, his career, at the height of his career, world champion, combative sport, struggle with addiction, alcohol and drugs, and then suicide, I can only infer that maybe something wasn't happy in his childhood.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that may well be the case. And I will watch, and I don't want to upset his family or anything like that because they've lost a brilliant guy, but I will watch with interest the outcome of the inquest in the new year, what comes out if there was a suicide note, which there probably would have been. So I look at that, these kids from cradle to grave are just a money-making machine for the legal industry. That's all they are. And that has to stop as well. They're going to have to stop having a whole sort of financial industry based on people's misery and kids' misery. Ultimately, it stops with the family. Be a good parent. Men, stop being absent. Stop being absent. I mean, look at Diana Spencer, her brother, who turned around and said, "My children will not be going to boarding schools. They will not be going." I mean, that's speaking volumes here. It really is, and look at the kids changing that whole attitude, and society will change almost in a heartbeat. And within 3 generations, which isn't long, I reckon crime will drop by 80%. And I say that with some confidence because 80% of the prison population of young men, they've come from abusive childhood backgrounds.
Yeah, of course.
So isn't it a no-brainer?
It is. Yeah, we know for a fact that ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, are the key determinant, for life outcomes. The more ACEs that you have, the worse your life outcomes are going to be. That is absolutely, there is a direct line through that. And of course, abuse, sits within that, divorce, death of a parent incarcerated, a parent with addiction, mental health problems, etc. So, this cycle, if you like, once you can swim back upstream, the benefits to society, to the NHS, to policing, to the tax
Everything.
base, it affects everything.
Everything. Can you imagine the destruction that a victim of abuse can do to themselves and to those around and to society? I'm not denigrating it, but if you think about, policing and then the hospital and then social services and the court fees and then it's huge. Now, if they gave the right treatment and the right healing and and they opened up more and more rehabilitation centres that can operate to an 80% success rate, and there are many that do, but the government ones don't. They fail. They have a recidivism rate by 80% because it's all down to money, cost cutting. Where there's others like the lay community and Yeldall Manor and places like that have got an amazing. So there's a guy called Colin Mackle, former survivor of the most horrific child abuse I think I've heard in the last few years. Drug addict on the streets of Glasgow, and this guy was a ticking time bomb. He now runs some of the most successful rehab centres in the country. They should be listening to people like Colin Mackle, and to Steve Walker, that used to run the lay community. People like that have come from abuse and know how it works. So, they've got to invest in it, and if they invest in that, they invest in the future of the country, and it will recoup rewards instantly.
I really hear you there. So just to recap a little bit, you talked about training. People in positions of authority, positions of care for young people need to be trained properly. The police need to seriously get into this and do it properly, thoroughly. Don't have another inquiry. We actually need to sort of nick some people. We need to set an example so that there is a deterrent, mandatory reporting, listening to survivors as far as healing, pathways to healing, rehab, etc. Because you say, I work with a lot of people with addiction, and there is a way to do it that you're not having to cling on for the rest of your life as a recovering addict. If you heal the initial wound, you don't need the coping mechanism anymore.
That's it. Heal the broken child. That's all you got to do. Heal the broken child. Give that broken child justice. And I say, put children first. Offending against children first. Robust crime fighting against this criminality. Vet people properly at every single level. Vet them, psychometrically test them. Question why they want to work with children. And the good ones, that's okay. But the bad ones, it will weed them out. And then go after all those that are frustrated and corruptly manipulated these cases, these child abuse cases, to a negative effect. And if they're in public office, have them nicked for malfeasance. Positive action on this. And that's it. Justice brings about healing.
So as we start to finish, wrap things up, do you feel, given the amount of scandals, the amount of, whether it's, we've just had Prince Andrew and the Maxwells, and then other stuff, blood scandal, Royal Mail, Harrods, it's just it's sort of scandal, and the boarding schools are coming out. in the papers nearly every other day for abuse stuff. So is this the turning point where we're looking at this stuff harder and it's becoming easier
Yeah.
for us to access and look at? What's your view on the sort of where we are on the trajectory?
Well, we've got to stop listening to liars, and there's many people that have been telling the truth, and there's many that have been lying. In my opinion, Prince Andrew's interview with the BBC is an insult to anyone with a modicum of intelligence. I think anyone that has got the most sort of rudimentary sort of experience in body language and that realised the guy was just making it up. So why are we listening to liars? Why are we allowing people to protect them? Why are we allowing the police to do nothing on this? That's what we've got to start. People's got to start bringing common sense into the mix here. Stop listening to these people. Out of all the paedophiles that I've investigated, how many of them admit it straight away, put their hands up and tell you the full truth? Well, I'll tell you what, zero. They're liars. They're the most deceptive, deviant criminals you'll meet. They are liars, and it's just stop listening to these lies because, have a little bit of independent thought here. Like say, put a bit of training out there. It should be in schools. It should be everywhere. They should be making people fully aware of how this works. And these grooming gangs, they could stop them. I'll tell you what, I would put a dent in them within the first week. Without a doubt. Just sit outside these kids' homes. Sit outside these kids' homes, and wait. And anyone who goes and picks them up, there is an offence of taking the child out of care at an unreasonable hour. Nick them for that. Positive action, and you will stop it. But to do nothing, it seems to be their alternative. And if you do nothing, that a lot of these people, they're silent victims. You don't hear from them. They suffer in silence all their lives. And it's only to the initiated, we know who they are because we see them through their addiction, through their anger, and anger is trauma. We recognise where it's coming from. But the rest of the world doesn't.
No, thank you so much. And thank you so much for today. We've got to bring things to a close, but I want to, just appreciate and honour your work. You came at great personal sacrifice. I know reading, researching before this interview, looking at your other, enormous personal sacrifice, but, you're still going with this. Just briefly, as we finish off, what's next for you? What are you really advocating for and following at the moment?
Yeah, well, I'm doing quite a bit with the media now, and I'm sort of showing them how the dynamics of this goes on. I think the country should raise their level of awareness above that of Asian grooming gangs and realise that this has been going on for generations in this country, and the monopoly on this isn't held by Pakistani minicab drivers. Paedophiles come in all classes, all colours, all social spectrum and everything. They need to be aware of that. And really, to raise awareness, I've got my book coming out called Ironic, which sort of goes on about my experiences and everything else. And what I've been doing really in speaking out against the London Mayor and the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. I've got nothing personally against any of these, but they're in public office. They should do their job. And I think they've both been lying. They've both been covering it up, and it shouldn't be allowed. And local government and central government should be speaking to people like me and finding out how can we put this right. Because we'll show them in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And so it's really come to fruition for me now, and finally I'm getting a voice I think I deserve. I don't want to make this about me, but if I can be that voice for the voiceless, then so be it.
Beautiful, Jon. Thank you so much. And what we'll share in the show notes, some links to your work, to your other podcasts. Deeply honour your sacrifice that you've made and your work. As you say, institutions largely cannot be trusted to police themselves.
No, they can't.
So it's people power now that will be the change. It will be people haven't had enough of it and asking or demanding better. And there's that great saying, isn't there? The desire to be in power should automatically disqualify you from ever being there, because
Yeah, of course.
you're not going to do good things with it. So we need to change the structures, people stepping up and coming forward. So
And and also to finish with a quote, in the words of Sir Edmund Burke, in order for the triumph of evil, it takes but for good people to do nothing. And we're good people, and we shouldn't be doing nothing. We should be doing something. And I say to all victims and survivors, it's not your shame. Now is the time to speak out. It is now, right? Before central London, a bomb goes off and the focus is on that, or something else happens, the monarch dies, or whatever it might be. The focus now is on child abuse cover-ups. Take this tiny little opportunity we've got and shout out. Flood the police switchboards with allegations, truthful ones, what you've been through. Make them, shame them into doing something, because now is our opportunity. We have this tiny, tiny little soundbite at a time. We've got to smash it, and we've got to tell the world this goes on. Wake up. Someone said to me, your target audience, John, has got to be the white middle classes. Wake them up. The Daily Mail readers, wake them up and realise that this does go on.
Thank you.
This isn't a third world country. It's here now. Wake up to this.
Wake up to this. John, that's a great way to finish. Thank you so much for your time today, for your work, for your energy. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to the podcast today. It's been the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I'm Chris Braitch, being with Jon Wedger, and look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. If you've been affected by anything that we've talked about today, come to seenheard.org.uk for support and emotional healing support groups, sharing groups, etc. So, there is good help out there. Ask for it and stand up and say something, as John has said. So thank you, everybody, for today, and we'll bring that to a close. Goodbye.